The Vanishing Destroyer. On a gray October morning in 1943, as World War II raged across the globe, a story emerged from the docks of Philadelphia that would haunt history for decades to come. Sailors, dock workers, and residents whispered of something extraordinary, something terrifying that had taken place at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. According to the accounts, a newly built destroyer escort, the USS Eldridge, vanished before their very eyes. The rumors claimed that military scientists, desperate to protect American ships from German U-boats, had conducted a dangerous and untested experiment. They sought to bend light, distort magnetic fields, and render the ship invisible not only to radar, but to the naked eye. What witnesses described was unlike anything seen before. The Eldridge, surrounded by a strange green-blue mist, arcs of electricity crackling across its hull, and then sudden silence. The massive warship, over 300 feet long, seemed to dissolve into thin air. Some swore they saw the ship reappear moments later, as if spat back into reality. Others claimed it vanished entirely, only to rematerialize hundreds of miles away in Norfolk, Virginia. The idea of teleportation, of a vessel slipping through time and space, was so outlandish that it seemed impossible. And yet, the whispers spread quickly. What had the Navy done in Philadelphia? What secret experiment had blurred the line between science and nightmare? According to legend, the men aboard the Eldridge paid a terrible price. Witnesses said some sailors were burned, others driven insane, and in the most horrifying accounts, crew members were found fused into the very steel of the ship, their bodies trapped within bulkheads, screaming until their last breath. These were not just tales of invisibility, but of human sacrifice at the altar of forbidden science. The U.S. Navy denied it all. Officials insisted no such experiment had taken place, dismissing the claims as wild rumors and misunderstandings. But denial only fueled the fire. If there was nothing to hide, skeptics asked, why did witnesses swear to what they saw? Why did the story refuse to die, resurfacing again and again through the decades? The Philadelphia experiment became more than just a rumor. It grew into one of the most enduring mysteries of American history, a tale of wartime desperation, secret technology, and perhaps a glimpse into forces humanity was never meant to control. Some call it myth. Others call it truth buried beneath layers of secrecy. All agree on one thing. The story begins with the impossible, the vanishing of a ship in broad daylight. This is where our journey begins. Not with answers, but with questions. Not with certainty, but with shadows. Because in October 1943, in the city of Philadelphia, something happened that continues to defy science, logic, and belief. And to this day, some insist the screams of the Eldridge's crew can still be heard, echoing across the waters of the Delaware River. America in War and Science. To understand the legend of the Philadelphia experiment, one must first understand the world of 1943. America was deep in the throes of World War II, fighting a desperate battle across two oceans. In Europe, German U-boats prowled the Atlantic, preying on Allied convoys, threatening to sever vital supply lines. In the Pacific, Japan fought ferociously to defend its empire. Every new weapon, every technological advantage, meant the difference between survival and defeat. In this climate of total war, science and the military became inseparable. The Manhattan Project was underway, a secret endeavor to harness the atom and build the most destructive weapon ever conceived. Radar was being perfected, giving the Allies an edge in detecting enemy planes and submarines. Advances in code-breaking were changing the very nature of intelligence. It was a time when the boundaries between science fiction and science fact seemed thinner than ever. At the same time, America was gripped by fear of German technological superiority. Rumors circulated about Nazi experiments in rocketry, advanced aircraft, and even secret weapons capable of altering the course of the war. Operation Paperclip, which would later bring German scientists to America, had not yet begun, but the awareness that the Reich was pushing the limits of science was already strong. To many, it seemed plausible, even necessary, that the United States might also be experimenting with ideas that bordered on the impossible. Philadelphia was no ordinary naval base. It was a hub of innovation, a place where scientists and engineers worked alongside sailors and officers to test new equipment. The Navy's Bureau of Ships conducted cutting-edge research into radar and electromagnetic technology. The shipyards bustled with activity as destroyers, cruisers, and carriers were built and repaired to keep pace with the demands of war. It was in this atmosphere of secrecy and urgency that rumors of a radical experiment first took shape. To the public, such stories were unimaginable. To those working in the military-industrial complex of the 1940s, however, the line between possible and impossible seemed blurred. Scientists like Nikola Tesla, whose theories on electromagnetic fields were well known, had laid groundwork that some believed could be adapted for invisibility. Einstein's theories of relativity and unified fields had introduced concepts that hinted at manipulating space and time itself. Though much of this was misunderstood or misapplied, the aura of genius and secrecy surrounding these men's work gave credibility to the wildest speculations. Officially, the Navy claimed that its research focused on making ships invisible to radar by degaussing electromagnetic coils to cancel out a vessel's magnetic field and thus protect it from magnetic mines. This was a real and practical technology deployed across the fleet. But in the fevered imaginations of wartime sailors and civilians, such projects easily morphed into something more sensational. If a ship could be hidden from radar, why not from the human eye? If magnetic fields could be manipulated, why not bend light or even matter itself? This was the crucible from which the Philadelphia experiment emerged, a time of war, secrecy, and scientific ambition. Against the backdrop of submarines prowling the Atlantic and bombers darkening the skies over Europe, the idea that the U.S. Navy might be attempting the impossible no longer seemed far-fetched. It was, in fact, almost expected. In the laboratories and shipyards of America, miracles were being forged every day. Why not invisibility? Why not teleportation? The legend of the USS Eldridge was born in this contexted context where science raced ahead of imagination and where the boundaries of reality itself seemed to be shifting. Whether the experiment truly happened or not, the world of 1943 made it a story people were ready to believe. The USS Eldridge. The legend of the Philadelphia experiment centers on a single ship, the USS Eldridge D-173. This destroyer escort, named after Lieutenant Commander John Eldridge Jr., a naval hero killed in World War II, was commissioned in August 1943, just months before the alleged experiment was said to have taken place. The Eldridge was no ordinary vessel. As a cannon-class destroyer escort, it was designed for speed and maneuverability, meant to guard convoys against the constant menace of German U-boats. Measuring 306 feet in length and displacing 1,240 tons, the ship carried a crew of around 200 officers and enlisted men. It was armed with torpedoes, depth charges, and anti-aircraft guns, a lean but deadly machine of war. To the casual observer, the Eldridge was simply another ship among thousands launched during the conflict. But to conspiracy theorists and believers in the Philadelphia experiment, it was much more, the centerpiece of a top-secret naval project. Official naval records show that the Eldridge served valiantly in the Mediterranean during World War II, escorting convoys and protecting Allied shipping from German submarines. After the war, it was transferred to the Greek Navy, where it sailed under the name HS Leon until the 1990s. Today, its service record is well documented. Yet between the lines of history, the ship carries a far darker reputation. According to accounts, the Eldridge was chosen for the Philadelphia experiment not because of anything unique about its design, but because it was newly constructed and available for testing. Its advanced electrical systems made it an ideal candidate for the supposed experiments with electromagnetic fields. Some versions of the story claim that coils of heavy wiring were installed throughout the ship, connected to powerful generators designed to warp space-time itself. Others suggest that experimental radar-absorbing technology was tested on board. Whatever the details, the Eldridge became forever linked to the myth. For the men who served on her, the story was far less glamorous. Sailors later reported being harassed with questions about whether they had witnessed the ship disappearing or teleporting. Many denied any knowledge, pointing out that the Eldridge's wartime service records place her far from Philadelphia at the time of the alleged experiment. Still, the rumors persisted, with some veterans themselves adding fuel to the fire by offering cryptic comments or contradictory memories. The ship's physical presence, its steel hull, its deck guns, its cramped interior stands in stark contrast to the surreal legend attached to it. Yet this tension between fact and folklore is what makes the story so compelling. Here was a very real ship with a very real history, forever transformed by whispers of impossible science. The Eldridge was not merely a vessel of where it became a vessel of myth. To this day, the USS Eldridge embodies the paradox at the heart of the Philadelphia experiment. It was an ordinary destroyer escort, one of hundreds built, and yet it became a symbol of the extraordinary, a ship forever said to have slipped between the cracks of reality. Its legacy, like the story itself, is caught between history and legend. The experiment begins. In the summer and fall of 1943, rumors spread that the U.S. Navy was preparing something extraordinary at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Sailors and dock workers spoke in hushed tones about unusual activity aboard the USS Eldridge. Strange equipment was said to be installed, massive cables running along the decks, powerful generators humming below, and coils of wire snaking through the ship's compartments. The official story was that the Navy was testing advanced degaussing technology designed to shield ships from magnetic mines. But the whispers hinted at something far more ambitious. According to later accounts, the experiment aimed to achieve what no military in history had attempted: invisibility. Not camouflage, not radar absorption, but total disappearance. The concept drew on speculative theories of Albert Einstein's so-called unified field theory, a hypothetical framework that sought to combine electromagnetism and gravity into a single set of equations. Though never completed by Einstein himself, these ideas were seized upon by those who believed the Navy was attempting to manipulate the very fabric of reality. The first tests, witnesses claimed, were small in scale. Observers reported a faint haze around the Eldridge as generators powered up. Some described a greenish-blue glow surrounding the ship, accompanied by arcs of electricity leaping across the hull. Instruments malfunctioned, compasses spun wildly, and radio signals faltered. For dock workers who watched from the shore, the sight was unforgettable. The steel giant seemed to blur, its edges indistinct, as if it were shimmering in and out of existence. In one version of the story, a test conducted in late July 1943 achieved partial success. The Eldridge appeared to fade from view, though not entirely. Men on nearby ships claimed they could still see a vague outline, as though the destroyer were hidden behind a curtain of heat or mist. Others swore the ship became invisible to radar, disappearing from screens even as it remained physically present in the harbor. These early results, though imperfect, fueled speculation that the Navy was on the verge of a scientific breakthrough. But with each attempt came mounting danger. Accounts describe sailors suffering disorientation, nausea, and headaches after the tests. Some complained of strange burns or unexplained rashes. Others whispered of men losing consciousness, their minds overwhelmed by the electromagnetic fields pulsing through the ship. The atmosphere aboard the Eldridge grew tense as crewmen began to fear what the next experiment might unleash. The culmination, according to legend, came in October 1943. This time, the Navy pushed the technology to its limits. Witnesses claimed the Eldridge was enveloped in a thick, glowing fog. Lightning-like discharges arced outward, and then, in an instant, the ship was gone. Not just blurred, not just hidden from radar, but gone, vanished from sight. For a few minutes, the waters of the Philadelphia harbor lay empty where a warship had floated moments before. Then, just as suddenly, the Eldridge reappeared, its steel form shimmering back into reality. For believers, this was the moment when the impossible became real. The U.S. Navy had cracked the code of invisibility. Yet even as awe spread among those who told the story, so too did horror. Because if the ship had truly vanished, then what had happened to the men aboard? The Philadelphia experiment, they said, was no triumph of science, but a catastrophe of human suffering. Eyewitness testimonies. The Philadelphia experiment's legend is built not on official records, but on the stories of those who claim to have witnessed it firsthand. From sailors to dock workers, the testimonies are varied, conflicting, and often terrifying. Yet together, they form the foundation of one of the most enduring conspiracy theories in American history. One of the earliest and most frequently cited accounts came from dockside laborers at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. They described seeing the USS Eldridge enveloped in a strange, glowing mist as massive generators roared to life. According to their testimony, the ship seemed to shimmer, its outline dissolving into the haze before vanishing entirely. Moments later, they swore, the ship reappeared, its return marked by violent discharges of energy that left some onlookers stunned and frightened. Other accounts came from sailors stationed on nearby vessels. Several claimed they watched in disbelief as the Eldridge literally disappeared from view, leaving only an empty harbor where it had been anchored. Some insisted they saw the ship instantaneously rematerialize in Norfolk, Virginia, hundreds of miles away, before vanishing again and reappearing back in Philadelphia. Such descriptions lent fuel to the idea that the experiment was not just about invisibility, but about teleportation, an idea both thrilling and terrifying. The testimonies also described horrific consequences for the crew. Some dock workers claimed that when the Eldridge returned, sailors staggered about in confusion, their skin burned or their minds fractured. Others swore they saw men screaming in agony, their bodies partially embedded in the steel bulkheads of the ship, fused into the very structure as though matter itself had been rearranged. These nightmarish images became some of the most infamous elements of the Philadelphia experiment's lore. Eyewitnesses also spoke of smaller, more unsettling details. Men said they saw sailors vanish before their eyes, only to reappear seconds later. Others described men who seemed to fade in and out of sight for days after the test, as if reality itself had loosened its grip on them. Some were said to go mad, unable to cope with what they had experienced, confined not by steel walls but by the prison of their own shattered minds. Of course, skeptics argue that these testimonies are unreliable. Memories fade, rumors spread, and in the fog of war, truth is often distorted. Some witnesses only came forward years after the alleged events, their accounts colored by time and the influence of others. Yet even with their inconsistencies, the stories share enough common threads: glowing mist, sudden disappearance, human horror, that they cannot be easily dismissed. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the eyewitness testimonies is not what they confirm, but what they suggest. If even a fraction of what was described is true, then the Philadelphia experiment was not just a scientific test gone wrong, it was an encounter with forces beyond human understanding. For the men on the docks and the sailors who whispered their memories, it was not theory, not myth, but lived experience. And it was an experience they would never forget. Teleportation to Norfolk. Among the most extraordinary claims surrounding the Philadelphia experiment is the idea that the USS Eldridge did not merely vanish from sight in Philadelphia, but was transported hundreds of miles away in an instant. According to numerous accounts, the ship was seen in Norfolk, Virginia, some 200 miles south before reappearing back in its original position at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. This aspect of the story transformed the legend from an experiment in invisibility to something even more sensational: teleportation. Reports claim that witnesses in Norfolk saw the Eldridge materialize suddenly, surrounded by a strange fog, before vanishing again. Sailors stationed there later recounted how men from the Eldridge appeared in local bars and mess halls, only to fade away or vanish entirely in front of shocked onlookers. These stories suggested not only that the ship had been teleported, but that its crew had been caught in some bizarre disruption of space and time. The mechanics of such an event, of course, defy conventional science. Teleportation of an object the size of a destroyer escort weighing over 1,200 tons would require energies and technologies far beyond what existed in the 1940s. Yet believers argue that the experiment was based on Einstein's unified field theory, which, if harnessed, might allow for manipulation of both light and gravity. By generating massive electromagnetic fields, they claim the Navy may have inadvertently opened a gateway between 2 points in space. Some versions of the story go even further, suggesting that the Eldridge did not simply travel through space, but through time as well. Allegedly, crew members reported moments of lost hours or days, with no memory of what occurred in between. In later retellings, some even speculated that the ship jumped not only to Norfolk, but briefly into another dimension, before re-emerging in Philadelphia. Such claims fueled decades of speculation, intertwining the Philadelphia experiment with theories of wormholes, time travel, and alternate realities. Naval records, however, tell a different story. According to official logs, the Eldridge was never in Norfolk during the dates of the alleged experiment. Historians point out that destroyer escorts like the Eldridge were constantly on the move during the war, escorting convoys and rarely tied up in one place. The supposed sightings in Norfolk may have been cases of mistaken identity, with witnesses confusing the Eldridge for one of her sister ships. Yet the persistence of the teleportation story suggests that, for many, the official explanation was not enough. What made the Norfolk story so compelling was not just the idea of teleportation, but the human dimension. If men really did appear and vanish in bars, if sailors really did fade from reality before their comrades' eyes, then the Philadelphia experiment was not just about secret technology, it was about tampering with the fabric of existence itself. Such tales carried the ring of science fiction, yet they spread like wildfire among those eager to believe that the Navy had unlocked powers beyond imagination. Whether the Eldridge ever truly leapt from Philadelphia to Norfolk may never be proven. But the persistence of these stories reveals something deeper. In an era of war and secrecy, the line between the possible and the impossible was thin, and people were ready to believe that the boundaries of space and time could be crossed. The Philadelphia experiment became not just a story of invisibility, but of teleportation, time travel, and the terrifying consequences of breaking nature's laws. The horrors on board. The most terrifying aspect of the Philadelphia experiment legend lies not in the ship's disappearance, but in what supposedly happened to the men aboard the USS Eldridge. According to those who recounted the tale, the experiment left the crew broken in body and spirit, their ordeal so horrific that it bordered on the unimaginable. Eyewitnesses claimed that when the Eldridge reappeared, chaos reigned on deck. Some sailors staggered around in a daze, disoriented and unable to remember where they were. Others screamed in agony, clutching their heads as if their minds had been torn apart. Men vomited, collapsed, or wandered aimlessly, muttering incoherent words. The crew, it was said, had been pushed beyond the limits of human endurance. The most infamous stories describe grotesque physical horrors. According to these accounts, some sailors were found fused into the very steel of the ship arms, legs, or even torsos embedded in bulkheads and decks, as though their bodies had been melded with the metal during the experiment. Others were said to vanish completely, their existence erased as though they had slipped into another dimension. In later retellings, there were stories of sailors who would fade in and out of sight long after the experiment had ended, as if they were no longer fully anchored in reality. Some survivors, the stories claimed, went mad. They raved about voices whispering in their ears, about seeing places and times that defied explanation. A few were said to burst into flames spontaneously, consumed by energies they could not control. Others were rumored to have become frozen, unable to move for hours or even days, trapped in some kind of suspended animation until they were jolted back to life. These tales painted a picture not just of physical torment, but of psychological horror men lost in a nightmare that followed them long after the ship's return. The Navy, of course, denied all of this. No official records mention injuries, deaths, or strange phenomena aboard the Eldridge. But to those who believed, such silence only deepened the suspicion that something terrible had happened. They argued that the Navy had covered up the truth, hiding evidence and silencing survivors to prevent the story from spreading. If sailors were destroyed by the experiment, what better way to erase the mistake than to erase the men themselves? The horror stories became central to the Philadelphia experiment's mystique. They transformed the tale from a mere technological curiosity into a full-fledged nightmare, one that warned of the dangers of tampering with forces beyond human control. The image of sailors fused into steel bulkheads or vanishing into thin air is as powerful today as it was in the first retellings. It suggests a tragedy not just of war, but of science gone terribly wrong. In the end, the horrors on board the Eldridge, whether real or imagined, cemented the legend's place in American folklore. They gave the story its emotional core, its human cost. Without the suffering of the sailors, the Philadelphia experiment might have been just another forgotten rumor. With them, it became a tale that continues to haunt imaginations, a reminder that some experiments should never be attempted. Carlos Allende's letters. If the Philadelphia experiment had remained only a whispered rumor among dock workers and sailors, it might have faded into obscurity. What gave the legend new life and propelled it into the public consciousness were the strange letters of a man named Carlos Miguel Allende, also known as Carl M. Allen. His testimony, cryptic and unnerving, became the cornerstone of the story as it spread in the 1950s. In 1955, Morris K. Jessup, an astronomer and writer on unidentified flying objects, published a book titled The Case for the UFO. In it, Jessup speculated on advanced propulsion systems and the possibilities of alien technology. Not long after the book's release, Jessup received a series of bizarre letters from Allende, who claimed to have first-hand knowledge of a secret Navy experiment in Philadelphia during World War II. The experiment, Allende insisted, had made a warship invisible, and he had witnessed the aftermath. Allende's letters were rambling, filled with underlined words and strange phrasing, but they described in chilling detail what he said had happened. He claimed that while serving aboard the SS Andrew Furuseth, a merchant ship, he saw the USS Eldridge suddenly vanish from its berth in Philadelphia. Moments later, he wrote, the destroyer reappeared, surrounded by a greenish haze. He spoke of sailors injured, driven mad, or fused into the ship's metal. He insisted the experiment was based on Einstein's unified field theory, and that it had gone catastrophically wrong. The story might have remained an eccentric footnote, if not for what happened next. In 1957, Jessup was contacted by the Navy's Office of Naval Research, which had received a heavily annotated copy of his UFO book. The margins were filled with notes, apparently written by 3 different hands, discussing aliens, advanced propulsion, and the Philadelphia experiment. One of the annotators appeared to be Allende. For reasons still debated, the Navy took enough interest to invite Jessup to Washington and discuss the strange document. Though the Navy never confirmed the reality of the experiment, its involvement with the annotated book later, known as the Vero edition, added an aura of legitimacy to Allende's claims. Why, skeptics asked, would the Navy concern itself with the ramblings of a crank, unless there was some truth hidden within? Jessup himself was unsettled. He became increasingly obsessed with the Philadelphia experiment, convinced that something dark and secret lay beneath the surface. His growing fixation ended tragically when he died in 1959 in what was ruled a suicide, though conspiracy theorists insist he was silenced. For believers, Allende's letters were proof that the Philadelphia experiment was real. They contained specific details, connected the event to respected scientific theories, and came with the chilling implication that the government knew far more than it admitted. For skeptics, the letters were incoherent ramblings from a disturbed mind, their value more in feeding imagination than in offering evidence. Yet regardless of one's view, there is no denying their impact. Without Carlos Allende, the Philadelphia experiment might never have become the legend it is today. In the end, the letters transformed the story from dockside gossip into a full-fledged conspiracy. They tied the myth to Einstein, to the Navy, and to a tragic human cost. They gave the tale its enduring power, and they ensured that long after the guns of World War II fell silent, the screams of the Eldridge's crew would continue to echo in the minds of those who dared to believe. Science versus fiction. With the legend of the Philadelphia experiment spreading, one of the most persistent questions became, could it really have been possible? The claims of invisibility, teleportation, and sailors fused into steel seemed like the stuff of science fiction. Yet believers pointed to scientific theories that, in their eyes, made the impossible seem just within reach. Central to these discussions was Albert Einstein's so-called unified field theory. Though never fully developed, the theory was an attempt to reconcile electromagnetism and gravity within a single framework. For those who connected the dots, the idea of bending electromagnetic fields to alter light and, perhaps even space-time itself seemed a plausible extension. The Navy, they speculated, had weaponized theoretical physics to achieve invisibility. Supporters also pointed to the work of Nikola Tesla, who had conducted experiments with high-voltage electricity, radio waves, and wireless energy transmission. Tesla's death in 1943, just months before the alleged experiment, added fuel to the story, with some claiming his notes were seized by the government and used in the project. If anyone had come close to unlocking the secrets of invisibility or teleportation, they argued it was Tesla. But physicists and historians have long dismissed these claims. The energies required to render a 1,200-ton destroyer invisible, even to radar, would have been astronomical, far beyond the capabilities of 1940s technology. Manipulating light to bend around an object, as in modern cloaking experiments, involves precise metamaterials and advanced optics that did not exist at the time. Teleporting a warship or its crew would require breaking the laws of physics as we understand them. The scientific critiques go further. Accounts of sailors fused into bulkheads, for example, defy biology and metallurgy. Human tissue cannot meld with steel. Such a phenomenon is the product of imagination, not science. Similarly, claims of sailors fading in and out of visibility resemble tropes from pulp science fiction more than laboratory reality. As one physicist bluntly put it, if the Philadelphia experiment happened as described, it would have rewritten physics entirely. And yet, the boundary between science and fiction in the 1940s was blurry. Radar, sonar, nuclear fission all were once thought impossible until they were suddenly real. The speed of scientific progress during World War II gave the public the sense that anything could happen. In such a climate, the extraordinary claims of the Philadelphia experiment did not seem as far-fetched as they might today. This interplay between science and fiction is what gave the story its power. For skeptics, it was nonsense. For believers, it was proof that the government had harnessed secret knowledge. For the public, it was entertainment, a tale that blurred the line between reality and imagination. The truth was almost irrelevant. What mattered was that the story fit the era's sense of limitless possibility. In the end, the Philadelphia experiment exists in that liminal space between science and fiction. It draws on the authority of great minds like Einstein and Tesla, borrows imagery from the pages of pulp magazines, and feeds on the fears and hopes of a world at war. Whether or not it could ever have happened is beside the point. What mattered was that it seemed like it might, and that was enough to ensure its survival as one of America's most enduring legends. Government secrets. If the Philadelphia experiment were nothing more than a fantastical story, it might have died out quickly. But what kept the legend alive was the enduring suspicion that the U.S. government was hiding something. Secrecy during wartime was expected, but secrecy afterward was what fueled decades of speculation. During World War II, secrecy was the lifeblood of military operations. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb, involved more than 130,000 people across multiple sites, yet remained hidden from the public until the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Against this backdrop, the idea that the Navy might have conducted a classified experiment in Philadelphia seemed plausible. If such massive secrets could be kept, why not this one? Officially, the Navy has always denied the Philadelphia experiment. According to its records, the USS Eldridge was never in Philadelphia on the dates in question, and no experiment in invisibility or teleportation was ever attempted. Instead, the Navy points to degaussing, a real technology involving electromagnetic coils used to reduce a ship's magnetic signature and protect it from mines. Degaussing, they say, could easily have been misunderstood by laymen as something far more dramatic. Yet for conspiracy theorists, these denials only deepen suspicion. Why, they asked, did documents about the Eldridge's movements seem inconsistent or incomplete? Why did the Navy take an interest in Carlos Allende's annotated UFO book if there was truly nothing to the story? Why were witnesses dismissed as liars or cranks rather than investigated? To believers, the government's response was not that of an institution with nothing to hide, but of one desperately trying to bury the truth. The Cold War added further fuel to the fire. In the 1950s and 1960s, revelations about secret government projects from CIA mind control experiments like MKUltra to clandestine weapons tests proved that officials were capable of deception on a grand scale. To those inclined to believe in the Philadelphia experiment, these revelations provided confirmation. If the government could drug unwitting citizens or test nuclear weapons in secret, why couldn't it also attempt to render a ship invisible? Some even suggested that the experiment's secrecy was part of a broader pattern. The United States, they argued, had stumbled onto dangerous knowledge technology that blurred the line between science and the supernatural. Such knowledge could never be made public without risking mass panic or geopolitical chaos. Thus, the story was buried, witnesses discredited, and records suppressed. The truth may be simpler. Wartime secrecy, combined with post-war paranoia, created fertile ground for conspiracy. But the perception of a cover-up became almost as powerful as evidence itself. In the minds of many, the very fact that the government denied the Philadelphia experiment was proof that it had happened. In the end, government secrecy real or imagined was the oxygen that kept the legend alive. Without it, the Philadelphia experiment might have faded into obscurity. With it, the tale endured, a reminder of how much power silence can hold. The Cold War spin. The story of the Philadelphia experiment did not fade with the end of World War II. Instead, it adapted and found new life in the tense atmosphere of the Cold War. In an era defined by secrecy, espionage, and the looming threat of nuclear annihilation, tales of vanished ships and secret experiments seemed both plausible and terrifying. By the late 1940s and 1950s, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a battle for technological supremacy. The race for nuclear weapons, guided missiles, and space exploration created an environment where the extraordinary became ordinary. Stories of government projects that pushed the limits of science fit neatly into the public imagination. If America could split the atom and land on the moon, why couldn't it also make a ship vanish? The Philadelphia experiment became a useful parable in this context. To some, it was proof of the government's relentless pursuit of military dominance, even at the expense of human lives. To others, it was evidence of a secret arms race in technologies far beyond public understanding. If invisibility or teleportation were possible, the Cold War seemed like the era in which they would be weaponized. The story also played into fears of unchecked government power. During the Cold War, revelations about classified programs like MKUltra, which experimented with mind control and secret nuclear tests in the desert, proved that the government was willing to take extreme risks in pursuit of advantage. Against this backdrop, the idea of an experiment that rendered a ship invisible and harmed its crew in the process seemed not only believable, but inevitable. In the media, the Philadelphia experiment was often linked to UFOs and extraterrestrial technology, which exploded into popular consciousness in the late 1940s after the Roswell incident. The notion that governments were hiding otherworldly knowledge resonated with a public already skeptical of official narratives. For conspiracy theorists, the Philadelphia experiment was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger tapestry of secrecy and deception. Cold War politics also influenced how the story spread internationally. In some circles, the tale was presented as evidence that the United States had achieved breakthroughs that threatened global stability. In others, it was mocked as implausible disinformation. Either way, the legend became entangled with the ideological battles of the age. Ultimately, the Cold War spin ensured that the Philadelphia experiment remained relevant long after 1943. It was no longer just a story about a single ship, but a symbol of the dangers of unchecked science and government secrecy. In a world teetering on the brink of nuclear war, the idea that humanity might tamper with forces it could not control felt all too real. The Philadelphia experiment thus became more than folklore. It became a Cold War myth, a cautionary tale about the costs of power, secrecy, and ambition. And in the shadow of mushroom clouds and iron curtains, it was a story the world was ready to believe. Hollywood and pop culture. As the decades passed, the Philadelphia experiment slipped further into the realm of legend, but did not fade. Instead, it found a second life in Hollywood and popular culture, where filmmakers, writers, and television producers seized on its chilling imagery and unanswered questions. What began as dockside whispers in the 1940s became a cornerstone of American science fiction. In the 1970s and 1980s, the story began to circulate widely in books devoted to UFOs, government conspiracies, and paranormal phenomena. Authors like Charles Berlitz, who had popularized the Bermuda Triangle, turned their attention to the Philadelphia experiment, cementing its place alongside other great unsolved mysteries. These retellings were often sensationalized, mixing fact, speculation, and outright fiction, but they ensured the story reached a mass audience hungry for the strange and unexplained. Hollywood soon followed. In 1984, the movie The Philadelphia Experiment was released, dramatizing the tale of two sailors who are hurled forward in time after their ship vanishes in 1943. Though fictionalized, the film introduced millions to the legend, blending romance, action, and conspiracy into a narrative that resonated with Cold War anxieties. A sequel followed in 1993, extending the myth for a new generation. Even those unfamiliar with the historical rumors came to know the name through cinema. Television, too, embraced the story. Documentary-style programs on channels like the History Channel, Discovery, and Sci-Fi revisited the Philadelphia experiment repeatedly, presenting it as both mystery and cautionary tale. Paranormal investigation shows wove it into broader discussions of UFOs, time travel, and government secrecy. Each retelling, whether skeptical or credulous, kept the legend alive. The imagery of the story proved irresistible to pop culture. The idea of a ship vanishing in a green haze, of sailors trapped in steel, of teleportation gone wrong, these images were tailor-made for books, comics, and even video games. Writers borrowed freely from the legend, embedding its themes into works of horror, science fiction, and alternative history. Even music referenced the experiment, with bands using it as a metaphor for loss, disappearance, and hidden truths. This cultural afterlife reshaped the Philadelphia experiment. For many, knowledge of a story comes not from eyewitness accounts or letters, but from Hollywood dramatizations and pop culture echoes. The line between fact and fiction blurred further, as the myth fed into art, and art, in turn, reinforced the myth. What might once have been dismissed as rumor became, through the power of popular storytelling, a permanent fixture of the American imagination. By the 21st century, the Philadelphia experiment had transcended its origins. It was no longer just a conspiracy theory or a wartime mystery. It was a symbol, invoked whenever discussions turned to government secrets, strange experiments, or the thin veil between reality and the impossible. Hollywood had ensured that even if the Eldridge never truly vanished, its legend never would. Skeptics speak. While the Philadelphia experiment has endured as one of the most captivating conspiracy theories in American history, it has also attracted sustained criticism from skeptics, historians, and scientists. For every believer who insists the USS Eldridge vanished in a haze of green mist, there are experts who argue that the entire story is nothing more than a collection of misunderstandings, exaggerations, and deliberate fabrications. One of the most consistent arguments from skeptics is the issue of documentation. Naval records show that the USS Eldridge was not even in Philadelphia at the time of the supposed experiment. Instead, logs place her in New York and other ports, performing routine convoy duties. These records, carefully preserved and corroborated by multiple sources, stand in stark contrast to the dramatic claims of teleportation and invisibility. Historians also note that the technology described in the Philadelphia experiment was far beyond the capabilities of the 1940s. Electromagnetic cloaking devices, time travel, and teleportation require levels of precision and energy that even today's most advanced laboratories struggle to achieve. In the 1940s, when vacuum tubes were still state-of-the-art, the notion of bending space-time with shipboard generators strains credibility. Moreover, skeptics have pointed out that many of the most famous accounts, including those of Carlos Allende, are riddled with inconsistencies. Allende's letters to Morris Jessup were incoherent, full of fantastical claims, and often contradicted themselves. When confronted, Allende admitted at times that he might have imagined parts of his story. Yet believers continued to cite him as a primary source. Other explanations for the myth's persistence focus on psychology and culture. Sailors and dockworkers in wartime Philadelphia may have seen unusual tests involving degaussing equipment or high-voltage generators. Without a clear understanding of the technology, they may have interpreted strange lights, fog, or electrical discharges as evidence of something supernatural. These impressions, passed along through rumor and retelling, could easily evolve into tales of invisibility, Skeptics also highlight the role of popular culture in amplifying the story. By the time the Philadelphia experiment became widely known in the 1950s, science fiction had already primed the public to accept tales of teleportation and time travel. Movies, pulp magazines, and radio dramas blurred the line between entertainment and reality, creating fertile ground for myths to take root. Even within the scientific community, attempts to debunk the story have sometimes reinforced it. When officials and experts publicly dismissed the Philadelphia experiment as nonsense, conspiracy theorists pointed to the denials as evidence of a cover-up. In this way, skepticism itself became part of the legend, fueling the cycle of belief. In the final analysis, skeptics argue that the Philadelphia experiment reveals more about human imagination and distrust of authority than it does about wartime science. It is a story that thrives on ambiguity, contradictions, and unanswered questions. And while skeptics may dismantle its details, they cannot erase its allure. For many, the very act of debunking only makes the legend more compelling. Believers hold on, despite the mountains of skepticism, contradictions, and official denials. The Philadelphia experiment has retained a passionate following. For believers, the lack of proof is not evidence of absence, but rather confirmation of a cover-up. They argue that the most extraordinary events are always hidden behind layers of secrecy, and that the truth about the USS Eldridge was deliberately buried to protect both national security and the public from knowledge it was not ready to face. Believers often point to the persistence of eyewitness accounts. Even if flawed or inconsistent, they argue that so many similar stories cannot all be fabrications. The green haze, the sudden disappearance, the horror of men fused into steel, these motifs appear again and again across testimonies, lending the legend an air of consistency that defies easy dismissal. To them, these recurring details suggest a core of truth distorted only by the passage of time. Another argument comes from patterns in government secrecy. Believers remind skeptics of the Manhattan Project, which remained hidden from the public despite employing over 100,000 people. If something as massive as the atomic bomb could be concealed, why not a smaller naval experiment in Philadelphia? They also invoke later revelations of programs like MKUltra, in which the CIA secretly experimented with mind control, as proof that officials are capable of hiding dark projects for decades. Some take the argument further, insisting that the Philadelphia experiment was not a failure, but a success, one that spawned entire secret programs in advanced physics and military technology. They suggest that teleportation, invisibility, and even time travel became the basis for black projects hidden within the vast budgets of the Pentagon. For these believers, the experiment was not a one-time anomaly, but the beginning of a new era of science, cloaked from the public eye. Theories abound about what became of the sailors involved. Some say survivors were institutionalized, their memories erased or altered. Others claim that men who could phase in and out of reality were quietly removed from society, their existence scrubbed from official records. Believers cite the suicides, disappearances, and erratic behavior of alleged witnesses as evidence that they had truly seen and experienced the unimaginable. Perhaps most compelling for believers is the emotional weight of the story. The Philadelphia experiment is not just about technology, but about human suffering. Tales of sailors lost, broken, or fused into steel carry a tragic power that resonates across generations. Even if the science is questioned, the horror of those accounts feels too vivid to be dismissed outright. For those inclined to trust their gut over official narratives, the tragedy at the heart of the legend is reason enough to believe. In the end, belief in the Philadelphia experiment persists because it fills a deep human need. It speaks to our distrust of authority, our fascination with forbidden knowledge, and our fear of science unleashed without restraint. For believers, it is not just a story of a vanished surepit is proof that reality itself is stranger than we are allowed to know. Legacy of the invisible ship. The Philadelphia experiment has endured for more than 8 decades, not because of evidence, but because of its power as a story. It has become a modern myth, woven into the fabric of American folklore, a tale told in whispers on docksides, dramatized on television, and debated endlessly in books and documentaries. Whether fact or fiction, its legacy is undeniable. For some, the story remains a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked science. The image of sailors fused into steel serves as a grotesque metaphor for human beings sacrificed to ambition, victims of experiments that tampered with forces beyond understanding. In this sense, the Philadelphia experiment echoes the broader anxieties of the 20th century fears of atomic energy, of government secrecy, and of technology advancing faster than morality. For others, it is a parable of secrecy and mistrust. The very fact that the Navy has consistently denied the experiment only fuels suspicion. In an age when governments have been caught in lies from Watergate to covert wars, people are inclined to believe that the most outrageous stories may contain a kernel of truth. The Philadelphia experiment thrives in that fertile soil of doubt, where denial is often taken as proof. Popular culture has ensured the tale's survival. Movies, books, and television have carried it far beyond the naval yards of 1943, transforming it into a symbol of hidden knowledge and forbidden science. To this day, new generations encounter the legend not through archives or naval logs, but through Hollywood dramatizations, paranormal documentaries, and online conspiracies. Each retelling, however distorted, breathes new life into the myth. Perhaps most intriguing is the way the Philadelphia experiment blurs the boundaries between science, science fiction, and belief. It sits at the crossroads of real wartime technology like degaussing and radar speculative theories from Einstein and Tesla, and the wild imagination of conspiracy theorists. It is at once unbelievable and unforgettable. In this way, it reflects humanity's enduring fascination with the unknown, the mysterious, and the terrifyingly possible. In the final analysis, the legacy of the invisible ship is not about whether the USS Eldridge truly vanished, teleported, or fused its crew into steel. The truth, lost in layers of rumor and retelling, may never be known. What remains is a story that continues to haunt imaginations, a reminder that some mysteries are too powerful to die. Even now, more than 80 years later, the Philadelphia experiment endures as a ghost ship of history forever, sailing the waters of our fears and our hopes, a phantom that reminds us of the thin line between knowledge and nightmare. Whether real or imagined, its legacy is secure. The tale of the invisible ship that refused to disappear.